I'm Eric Shepard, and this is Regarding Music. I'm here with Michael Clement, who's a pianist and composer. Michael, thank you so much for coming on Regarding Music. I'm really looking forward to our discussion here today.
Yeah, I'm so glad to be here. I love talking about music and you know, love talking about what we do and how we can become better as both musicians and business people so we can all thrive.
Amazing. So, before we get going, why don't you take a second to introduce yourself and talk a bit about the work you do?
Yeah, so I am a pianist and composer as Eric said, and I am most known as a jazz pianist, but from the very beginning of my journey, I started as a classical pianist and went into jazz. I've always been about becoming a consummate musician, trying to learn um, a lot of skills. And I think at some points it's led me to be kind of a generalist, but throughout my journey I've always wanted to expand my musicianship so that I can tell more stories and become um, uh, an artist that encompasses all genres.
Amazing. You touched on something really interesting there that I think about a lot, kind of the idea of being a generalist versus like dialing in on something
Yeah.
really specific. Because I would say in my own musical career, I am a generalist,
Mm.
100%.
Yeah.
I guess for more background on me, I'm a choral musician, composer, choir conductor, and singer and podcaster now.
Yeah.
uh, it was one of those things that requires a fairly I would say that podcasting, talking about music online, requires like a very general knowledge and interest in music. But put it this way, I've found, at least for me, it's been better to be like 8 out of 10 good at each of those things than it is to be like the guy in one of them. Because unless you are the guy,
Yeah.
it can be difficult, right? I mean, I'm sure it's a different conversation entirely if you're like, I want to be, the next Yo-Yo Ma of
Right.
our time, or if I want to be like the top hot opera singer. That's a different discussion, I think, than, especially I feel like for kind of composition, because I feel like being a composer requires you to have that sort of general knowledge about, okay, I need to know about, piano or strings or, vocals and choir, like knowing like what things might be difficult for a choir to do, whilst also knowing, okay, like what's going to sound good in like a string orchestra accompaniment that's happening in the same piece isn't the same thing as being like the best singer out there or a virtuoso violinist.
Yeah.
I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's and I might be jumping ahead a little bit too much with this quote that just comes to my mind is that what got you here won't get you there. And what I mean by
Yeah.
that is that up until this point, I've always been a generalist, and I really feel that for a lot of musicians, you need to start out being a generalist. I feel like when I say that, I mean being good at many things. And what that has done for me is um, because I have like 5 or 6 areas where I get work, no one of those areas, like if any of those areas were to fall or I stopped getting work in any of one of those areas, I would be totally fine. And I feel like
Right.
for the past probably 5 to 10 years, that's been such a big advantage for me because I get work as a jazz pianist. I get work as an accompanist. I get work as, on a very small basis for film scoring or media scoring. I get work as obviously a piano teacher. And so there are just all of these ways in which we can work. And I think when you're beginning your journey, it's so important to have multiple streams of income. What I think happens though, and this is something that I'm facing now, is that because I'm so spread thin, I don't have the time to really devote to one area. And
Right.
so throughout the past, I would say year or two, it's been more of now that I've gotten to critical mass, I can't take all the work that people are asking me to do because
Yeah.
I have these long-term goals that I want to meet. And so throughout that process, I've had to kind of trim some branches. I used to do a lot of cover band keyboard work, a lot of like programming synthesizers to sound like the original records. And I cared a lot about that, but it was the amount of time that I was spending versus the amount of payoff that I felt that I was getting artistically
Yeah.
and personally wasn't it wasn't it wasn't serving me any longer. So I decided to cut off that branch and
Yeah.
to prune that a little bit. And and throughout that process, now I find, okay, now I have maybe 2 or 3 areas where I'm really focusing, and eventually probably it'll be 1 or 2. Like, but I feel like if there are young musicians that are starting out, I feel like sometimes the right we get we get the right advice at the wrong time. Um, and it could even be that the advice that I'm giving you is not what you need to be hearing. You kind of need to figure out what's the next step for you. But for me, it served me so well to be a consummate musician in so many areas up until this point, and it still continues to serve me. But um, it's come to a point where I've had to say, okay, well, now I need to actually decide what I want to specialize in.
Right.
So that's been,
No,
yeah.
I think that that's really interesting in that my experience, the whole music school university area,
Yep.
which, for so many people, that's kind of our the beginning of our music career, maybe high school sort of youth orchestra stuff before that. But I remember, I guess I had a more general music education when I was a kid than a lot of people did, in that,
Mhm.
I just lucked into like my grandfather being a music prof. So, I was able to get some of those, we did sight singing and like dictation and music theory, when I was much younger than you might get introduced to some of those things.
Yeah.
And I was really lucky for that. But one of the things that I found was, in kind of that high school, music school, I guess, era, the people who you thought were really good were the really good players, right? The people who had been more specific, who had kind of dialed in on, okay, I've just been playing violin or piano since I was 5 years old and practice all the time. But then when you get into music school and have to start dealing with some of the context stuff out of the performance area, like, it's fine. I'm not trying to be, a hater if that's the route that you're going, but the if you're, you have to do other things that are not those, that are not kind of like performance oriented. I found that it seemed like there'd be people who were really good players and then really really struggled in things like, dictation, keyboard harmony, sight singing theory. I don't know. Like, what did you find? Working with other musicians, I guess, as you were coming up, as it pertains to being a generalist versus being more specific.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's a smaller part of it that's just like book smarts versus I'll call it street smarts. I don't know if it is really street smarts, but it's like
Sure.
application knowledge
Right.
versus
Like
book knowledge.
like theoretical.
Yeah, and I think yeah, give me a second to think about that question.
Sure.
Um, I feel like a lot of, well, maybe what it comes down to is that there were a lot of performers that had a ton of natural talent. They worked hard on very one thing, very specific one thing, and they get to a point where, you know, maybe going into these other areas like music history or music theory um, is kind of the next thing they need to do, but maybe not. There are a ton of performers that still don't know a, a ton about how to orchestrate or how to,
Yeah.
and it's totally fine. I think that the place I'm more interested in is when they get out of school, those people that were ultra specific, that chose not to learn. I'm just, off the top of my head, there were a lot
Sure.
of pianists that were so focused on their concert music that they never learned how to play for a wedding, for
Okay.
example. or they were so focused on performing that they never thought to develop their skills as a teacher and how to communicate. And so I think that like the school discussion, that's like one discussion, and I'm not exactly sure the answer to that. I don't know if that's my area, but I'm always concerned about what I sometimes call the music school conveyor belt,
Okay.
where where you get one person that does piano performance, and this is just one example. It could be any
Sure.
type of performance degree. I find it more prevalent in performance degrees than other degrees, but it's still there, where you start off piano performance undergrad, and then you finish and you go straight into your masters and you do piano performance masters, and then
Right.
you go straight into a piano performance doctorate,
Yeah.
and then you finish and you've spent, I don't know, 10, 12 years, and even before that, growing up since you were 5, 6, 7, uh, learning how to master your craft as a specialist of your instrument, only to find out that the jobs that are at your level uh, are so competitive or they don't exist.
Yeah.
um, so like I was saying, in my undergrad, I was always the one that got the gigs in the piano performance department. I did a dual bachelor's, so I did piano performance undergrad and a jazz studies undergrad.
Okay, cool.
But all the gigs, anyone who requested a pianist to play for a wedding, or for a private party, or sometimes the university would have internal events that they would hire pianists
Right.
for, all of those requests, for whatever reason, unbeknownst to me, always went through the classical piano department. And there were maybe, there were probably like 80 to 100 piano majors. This is at the University of North Texas, so it's a very large school. There's probably 80 to 100 piano majors. And I got half the gigs or more. Like I got most of the gigs. And
Wild.
yeah, and it was great. I was getting all this experience. I was playing for all these events. I was meeting people, um, and it was because I had just gone a little bit outside of the classical piano mold, and I had decided to just learn some more skills. Granted, I was also a jazz piano major, so that made me
Helped a
more,
bit.
yeah, more inherently open to those types of situations where a lot of pianists, maybe in classical performance degrees, would kind of turn their nose up at, um, I don't know, playing some pop song or playing musical theater or playing, whatever it is. But I was able to get so many opportunities because I decided to open myself to opportunities outside of, you know playing at Carnegie Hall, or
Right.
playing at the more realistically down here in Texas, playing at the Clyburn Center or something like that. And so I think, yeah, once again, starting out, it's so important to be open to these new opportunities, and to not say, "Oh, I don't do that," but to say, "Could I do that?" and
Yeah.
and think, well, what additional skills do I need to do that? And usually, for most pianists, it's not actually that much. It's not terribly difficult to pull out a Billy Joel songbook and learn some tunes, or to pull out a Beatles songbook and then play a wedding, things like that. So yeah, once again, it's like, to get to this point, that's been so helpful for me. I think once you get past a certain point where you can start focusing, you've got your needs met, you're paying your bills, after you graduate, you have a career, then we can start to say, okay, now I'm gonna really focus. Maybe this is the point where you say, well, now I'm gonna build a solo career.
Yeah, and I think that there's a really big difference between, deciding to be really specific, dialing in on something when you're young. That's maybe more predicated on an ambition or a dream than
Yeah,
on, okay, I've gone and I've done a bunch of different things. I've done a bunch of business, right? And I've learned what works, and I'm going to just focus in on the thing that I do really well
yeah,
that people will pay me for. Like, that to me is not the same discussion at all.
no, 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 no.
So I guess more background on me, like I did an interesting program. I'm Canadian, so I didn't go to college. I went to university.
Okay. Nice.
That's been the giveaway. I've
Not
had so many people be like, "I know you're not American because you call it university."
Do you call it uni? 'Cause
Oh
that's
yes.
okay. Yeah.
Oh yes.
That's
So
uni.
yeah, so I went to University of Western Ontario
Yeah.
in London, Ontario, and they had a program where I did 2 years of music and 2 years of business and got a business
Oh,
degree. Yeah.
interesting.
I could have done a fifth year and got a music degree, but I graduated in 2020, so I was like I could either do remote lessons or I could just like go and work online in a tech job, which is what I did.
Right.
Uh
I did.
you know,
Yeah, I remember reading that or seeing that. Yeah.
yeah, so I always kind of had, a business mindset in music that I think, is a valuable thing to develop. And, one of the things, like the first thing in business that we talk about, like if you're an entrepreneur and you're like, I'm going to go launch a new product or create a business, the first thing that we think about is like, okay, like what problems are we solving? Who are we solving them for?
Yep.
What value are we creating? How are we bringing that to the table? Like that's the first thing. Like if you don't know that, you're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
But I feel like in music, that people don't really have that discussion that much.
Yeah.
Right. It'll just be like, this is the thing that I'm interested in, and I'm just going to go and do that. Which I think as an artist, it's absolutely, and this is one of the things that I find tough to balance. As an artist, absolutely go and be like, I've gone, learned these things, studied really niche, drilled down on this specific area of music, and I'm really interested in it, and here's why you should be interested in it as well.
Right.
Right. I think that that's fair. But on the other hand, being able to say, all right, these are the skills that I've developed. Like, how can I actually like create economic value with them?
Yeah.
Is like, that's a conversation we don't have very often in music. At least I've found.
Yeah. I feel like early on, I think I was preconditioned to be thinking that way, because even growing up, like staying out of debt was a big value. Making a living was a big value in my family, and so when I said I wanted to be a music major, there was concern about like, okay, well, how are you going to make a living? And that was largely coming from my dad, and very well intentioned, mind you, and
Yeah.
and so going into college, I had already been teaching as my main high school job.
Yeah.
And so teaching was my main job up until that point. And so I continued to college, got a great scholarship, and I said, okay, that's great. I'm good there. And then even throughout school, I started teaching for myself. And so that was something that started pretty early. But I think I took an entrepreneurship course over the summer that was required. It was a required course, but it started getting me thinking a little bit differently. Like, how can I actually make this into a real good product or service? And then when I finally graduated with my master's in jazz composition, I said, okay, I've got to figure this out. It was actually not just when I graduated at about the same time with my master's as I got married. So, which also is another driver to be like, not externally at all, but internally, it's like, okay, I need to figure this out.
100%.
I need to figure out how to make this a sustainable career. And so I started learning all I could find to learn about business, and I invested in some programs to get me started, and I started launching products, and by products I mean service products like coaching programs and my private studio. And so I think for me it's always been kind of a natural progression, but there have been some key hinges that were like, okay, now we're going to really focus on getting to a certain point, or now we're going to make a big move in this one particular direction. Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like getting back to what I think, what did you call it, like the conveyor belt of music school?
Music school
where it's like,
belt.
I do think, and I mean, I'm a bit biased, I guess, because I have 2 years of music school, and then like everything else I've done with music has been experiential.
Yeah.
Or like one-on-one, where I've just had like good mentors,
Yeah.
teach me offline type of thing, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I want to preface with that. I think that when it comes to schooling, like it's easy to not have to think about those things when you're just like, oh, the next step for me, yeah, I'm just going to do my master's, and then it's,
Right.
yeah, I'm just going to do my doctorate, and then I'll just be the best. Like I'll just be a prof, and it'll all work out.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is like that doesn't actually happen for like most people who go for like a
Yeah.
lot of people. And it does, and even if it does happen, it doesn't mean that it could have been the best thing, right?
Yeah.
Uh, you know, so I don't know. I always put it this way. Like I always think about, okay, how can you develop skills and then use them to, grow a business or to, sort of develop something for your own rather than just going out and being like, okay, if I do the right things, it'll work out because,
Right.
it might, but it
Yeah.
might not.
It might not.
So shifting gears back to your sort of education experience, you said you went to university in Texas.
Mhm.
Tell me a bit about how you kind of got started out. I guess
Uh,
your backstory.
Started out getting to college, or starting out as a musician.
Just in general, yeah. Tell me your story as a musician.
Yeah, so I started piano lessons with my mom. My mom is a piano teacher, and I grew up in Utah, and so I started out piano lessons there, and I hopped from teacher to teacher. I would usually like study with my mom for a couple of years, and then she would send me off to someone, and then
Yeah.
at at uh, at one point I got fired from a teacher probably because I was uh, I think I was just kind of all over the place. So
Yeah.
he was like, "Oh, I can't teach him," uh, and so there were a few times that I got hopped back and forth from my mom to another local teacher, and
Yeah.
eventually, but I was always like, I always loved music. I always kind of did my own thing. I'd play music way too fast, and sometimes when my siblings would be playing songs, I'd go to the piano and I would mess with their songs. So I like play their song, and I'm the youngest. So
Okay.
I'm going to the piano, playing my older siblings' songs, but like making all the major chords diminished, or like uh, things that just, and they didn't like it. But anyway, the point being that I always had this curiosity with music,
Yeah.
and even though I was taking classical piano lessons that were fairly structured, and I went through like the very specific, federation in Utah, there's a program called Achievement in Music, which is called AIM.
Okay.
But I did that. I'm not sure if that exists at a national level or international level. But I, went through all the levels and did that. But eventually, I started studying with a teacher named Lenora Brown, and she's I don't know if, I think she's retired now, but she was at the University of Utah, and so I started studying with her, and that's really when things started to pick up. Prior to starting lessons with her, I had always been playing a bunch of different instruments. I did percussion in junior high. I did clarinet in junior high, and at some point, I started playing, like, I attempted the oboe. I did, like, my mom had a French horn that I picked up. So I was kind of like just kind of messing around,
Trying them out.
doing some different things with all my electives. And in ninth grade, that's when it really shifted, where it was like, oh, I'm with a serious teacher now. I have to really practice. And so it started. I was practicing 3, 4, 5 hours a day, and um, and doing competitions, just kind of like local and regional competitions. But but that's when it got really focused in terms of that. And like kind of parallel to that, I was doing my own little jazz journey, on the side. And
Right.
so I was playing in jazz bands, and there were some extracurricular jazz bands that I was a part of. I did Allstate, but this was kind of separate from having a teacher. So I
Yeah.
just kind of learned it all by listening. I also had a few mentors that I wouldn't say they really taught me, like meaning they didn't like show me the steps through, like A B C D E, but it was like they'd show me like one thing that opened up a lot of
Right.
possibilities for me. So I didn't really have a clear pathway with jazz piano, but I was able to figure it out despite the challenges, and so I have like this classical piano path, which was basically most of my practice, and then I
Yeah.
had this jazz piano path, which was just kind of like on my own, figuring things out as I went, um, and then eventually when I got to auditioning for college, I knew I wanted to major in music, and finally when I got to that point, I was like, well, I want to do both classical and jazz. So I started applying to different colleges, and um, and there were some that were like, sure, yeah, you can do classical and jazz, and then there were others that were like, no, absolutely not. Um, you have to pick, and so I ended up auditioning at the University of North Texas, and um, I I had my best audition of the circuit. I auditioned at I think 6 schools, and I had my best classical audition there. I also got into the jazz program, and the head of the piano department came up to me after my audition, probably a couple hours. I was just hanging out on campus. He caught me in the hall, and he said, "Hey, we loved your audition. We want you." And I was like, "Great, I'm going to need a full ride." Which I don't know how I had that confidence, as I guess I would have been 18 at the time, but I was like, "Great. I need a full ride. Can you do that?" And he was like, "Yeah, we can make that happen." So so somehow I got a full ride scholarship at University of North Texas, and also I was like, oh, and I also want to major. I want to dual major in jazz, and so I got this like little. The jazz department gives like these little $1,000 scholarships just so you can qualify for in-state
Right.
tuition. It's kind of a Texas thing. If you get like a
Okay.
scholarship over a certain amount, they'll give you in-state tuition. But so I got like this itty bitty scholarship, and then this very large scholarship for classical piano, which was awesome. But I ended up going to the University of North Texas, and throughout my time there, it was interesting because I started out as like, I'm doing classical piano. Oh, and I'm also doing jazz piano.
Right.
But kind of as I went through my undergrad, things started to shift. I started actually getting work with jazz piano. I started gigging in Dallas, and so there was this clear shift from, okay, I'm a classical pianist, to I'm really more of a jazz pianist, but I have to continue really nailing it on all of my classical piano things so that I can keep my scholarship. Which, I was a perfectionist, so that means like I wanted to get A's on all of my juries. I was a straight A student,
Yeah.
in terms of the book knowledge side of things. But by the time I got to the end of my undergrad, it was like, I really enjoy the culture of the jazz side more than I enjoy the culture of the classical piano side. So ultimately, I ended up um, mostly switching over to the jazz side, and I don't mean that in terms of like even my current work. I do a lot of jazz, but also I do classical accompanying. But
Yeah.
I I guess the big decision was, no, I'm not going to go get my master's in classical piano performance,
Right.
and um, and then I majored in jazz composition, and then we're here. Several
And
years.
here we are.
Here we are. Yeah, like I don't know, 6 years later. Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned you were doing some sort of online teaching stuff, coursework. How did that come about?
You mean my online course that?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, you like not you studying,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
you providing it as
Yes.
a product. Because I feel like a lot of people think, okay, I could, I'll give piano lessons to like my neighbor's kid, and then I'll start it, it'll go
Right.
from there type of thing, and don't necessarily think about, okay, I could do online as an avenue.
Yeah. So like I mentioned earlier, as I was graduating. I got married around the same time. It was like, okay, how can we make a living from this? I already had a studio of
Right.
like 6 or 7 students, I want to say. And after I graduated, it was like, okay, how can I make this a living? And so I started following a bunch of people, and Ben Nguyen, who actually follows you. I saw him.
Yeah, he was my last guest on the pod.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I had him on like last week. That's so
Okay,
funny.
that's not,
Small
yeah.
world.
So he was my first business coach. Um,
Wild.
I started seeing some of his content soon after I graduated. I started following all of his stuff, and so I decided to, go into his program. And best thing I ever did in terms
Oh,
of
really?
the starting of my journey as an online educator. Um, it just gave me so many fundamentals
Yeah.
about business, um, and I don't know exactly how his program is now, but at the time it was basically learning how to charge more for
Yeah.
learning how to create a high ticket product and learning how to sell it. And in doing that, I learned so much about just business fundamentals, how to create value, exactly what you were saying before. Like, what is the problem I'm solving? Who am I solving it for?
Yeah.
And how can I create something that really aligns with that? So I had a program called the Complete Pianist, and it was really just aimed at taking classical pianists and helping them learn how to learn by ear and to improvise.
Yeah.
And that went pretty well for a decent period of time. But I learned that there was, at least for um, going from cold to high ticket, meaning people who don't know you very much, it's very difficult to go from them not knowing you that much to paying you a premium
Right.
for your lessons. So
It's
what I found when I launched my program, the Complete Pianist, what I found is that um, all the people who knew me, who were in this area, or had knew a friend of a friend, or anyone who already knew me and had known me for 3-4 years, they were lining up at the doors to study with me. And
right.
the program was a 6-month program. And so once they got through the program, once I had like this initial rush of students that got through the program, I realized it was very, very difficult to actually get students online with those prices. And I think if I did it again, I would do better. I would do better at warming up those leads and actually being able.
That's always the way, though. You look back and if I had done this and this and this, it
Yeah,
would have been fine.
yeah, and so I think if I did it again, maybe I would have been more successful. But the main takeaway that I had is that the type of work that I was doing, which if you want to sell, if you want to create like higher value, higher price point coaching products or services or programs, um, you need to build a lot of trust, but also the process in getting those clients is going to be much more intense. What that means is
Right.
that every single person that we're going to work with, we have to get on a call with. We have to get on a Zoom call, and we have to talk about their problems, and if their problems are exactly right for the solution, and the only way they're going to be willing to pay that premium for a program is if they're like a perfect fit and if they really really want it now. And so um, while it was so helpful for me to learn how to talk to people and how to have a sales conversation and how to really diagnose someone's problems, I I learned that I didn't enjoy that workflow
Yeah.
for getting clients. And once again, I think if I do it again, I think it'll be better. But at the time, it wasn't working for me, and so I decided to switch gears around. Was it a year ago? Probably at this point around a year and a half ago. I think it was last year, July. I had a big launch for my group program. and I spent probably a month or two working on it, and I got one client. That huge launch. So it was an epic failure, and then I decided, okay, I can't do this anymore. I'm gonna start. I had been avoiding like really focusing on jazz for a
Right.
while. I wanted to stay style agnostic, which I may have more programs in the future that are not tied to a specific genre, but I decided to go that route for this because it is what I'm an expert at. I'm expert at jazz piano, and I have so much experience teaching jazz piano, so I decided to do an online course. And so I started working on the course about a year and a few months ago, probably 14 or 15 months ago. Started working on the course. I started teaching it to my current students, and then throughout, um, like basically that time, so like probably August, September 2023 to around March or April, I started recording it, and then I pre-launched my course, the Jazz Piano Launchpad, in June. And so pre-launching means that I actually hadn't finished all the videos, but I decided to go ahead and start marketing it to see if people actually wanted it.
Right.
And so June or July, I pre-launched it. I started running Facebook ads, which was a whole different learning curve, and I got like 25, 30 students from that pre-launch, and then um, and then I shut down my ads. I was like, okay, this is gonna work. So I finished the course. After that, took me about a month or so, and then finally I launched for real, evergreen, meaning I'm always
It's
selling the
happening.
course. It's happening. Yeah, and so still running Facebook ads. Had a Black Friday sale. Um, you know the whole thing. That makes sense. Yeah,
That's
so that's kind
amazing.
of my journey with that. Yeah. Do you have any questions about it?
Yeah, I guess the thing that I see actually a really big parallel between deciding to launch a course and conducting,
Hmm.
choir conducting.
Interesting.
That I feel like this could be relevant to a whole area of music, but one of the things that I have found difficult in conducting and talking to other conductors on the pod is, you know, finding the point at which you would say you're a conductor. And what I mean by that is
Yeah.
like it's easy to be like I'm studying to do this, right? But is it the point that you have your own choir, that you're, I have a master's degree, or at what point are you good enough to say I'm a conductor?
Yeah.
And I could see that being something that is also relevant for launching a course.
Hmm.
Like if I'm a pianist, at what point am I good enough? Am I either in terms of the skills that I could deliver, quote unquote, good enough to launch a course? Because I could see that being all right. You could be like a really good undergrad student who has lots of knowledge and
Yeah.
makes good content that people would pay for. you know but then there might also be lots of people who are maybe a few years older than you and kind of in that university system who would say like, he's just an undergrad student, why would you listen to him?
Right.
So and it's the same dynamic kind of happens in conducting, right? Where you might be really good, or you have a really good choir, or you know what I mean, like
Yeah.
you might have the goods, but then there is still that element of, okay, well, like they don't have a master's or a doctorate type of thing. And I'm really interested in your take or experience with what it felt like to say, okay, I'm gonna really really put myself and my ideas out there for sale.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is that the only people that matter, uh, meaning when they see your ad or they see your content, the only people that
Right.
matter are the people that care. The only people
Yeah.
that matter are the people who will actually buy your product, your
Right.
service.
Customers are happy.
Yeah.
Everything's good
and
in the
and
world.
so I've my program it's an 8-week program. If you do it, and you practice daily and you work through the program, it will take you 8 weeks. If
Right.
if you if you take less time, or maybe you're not already a pianist, maybe you need some extra time, it's going to take you longer, maybe 12, 16 weeks. But in a lot of my ads, I'll say you can learn jazz piano in 8 weeks. And so I got a lot of haters my like my first round of ads. um and I've changed some messaging to not so much focus on the 8 week aspect, because that is, someone has to already play the piano, and they have to um be willing to put in at least, half hour to an hour a day, working through the program to get through
Yeah.
it 8 week through it in 8 weeks. And I feel like, yeah, there's a lot of people that come out of the woodworks and they're just like, yeah, this is a scam. This is not going to help people. So I think that's one side of it, is that you have to kind of separate yourself from the people, the critics that are going to
Yeah.
say, what do you know? Even just like the other day, I saw an ad from Rick Beato. I don't know if you're familiar with
Oh, I'm not
Rick
familiar.
Beato. Like, he's probably got like 2-3 million followers on YouTube. Like, a music channel, very, very successful music channel, and he launched a course about songwriting.
Yeah.
And it was specifically like, how do you? It was like a theory based um, online course for songwriting. And I saw in the comments, people are like, "Where's your hit song?" Like, you can't teach songwriting until you've done this, this, or this.
Won a Grammy. Yeah.
Right. So I feel like there's a lot of gatekeepers that
Yeah.
that that are nobodies. They're nobodies. That are
Oh, no, 100%. And it's interesting because I mean, I feel like you're way more just like niche wise, like more likely to get like hater comments on like ads for a course than you are on like, me sharing compositions in like a podcast type of thing.
yeah,
It's like,
yeah,
I find there are two. I've had a few haters, and I was like, yes, I'm like relevant.
yeah. Like, that's
You
something
know,
I can make content about. Like,
right?
when people start commenting, that's good. Yeah.
Yeah, keep it up, guys, for the Instagram algorithm.
Right.
But
Yeah. Exactly.
I found I think, having someone like disagree with a guest take on a pod, like that's really like whatever kind of thing. I'm like, okay, like sure,
Yeah.
and that's part of like, in my opinion at least, like that's what comes with facilitating discussions. It's
Yeah.
like that's good, kind of, right?
Yeah. I need to say something that's at least somewhat polarizing, or it's not interesting. Right.
Well, also, like, even put it this way, like, I probably say a lot of things that are controversial from a musician's perspective, but like, out of all the things you could possibly say, like being like, I'm not that interested in post-tonal music. Like, people who are not musicians are going to be like, yeah, like, of course. But like, people who are in a composition
Right.
program would be like, oh my god, like, I have this really hot take. How could you possibly think
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. You're basically
Like,
yeah.
so I found that to be interesting. And the other thing that I found, so like, one of the I've talked about this on the pod, but like, I learned how to make like AI choir renderings.
Yeah,
So like,
I started looking at some of your posts, and I saw that, and I was like, "Huh, I wonder how he's doing
yeah,
that." Yeah,
no, it's actually kind of, it's I wouldn't say it's easy, but like it's doable, and it kind of gets you the level, I'd say, of like the same quality as like a Sibelius playback.
oh, okay,
And some people are like, it doesn't sound like an actual choir, and I'm like, that's not the point, guys. Like,
yeah,
it's not it. But I'm like, hey, comment, like, and share.
yeah,
Get me those views. Get me those views.
right, yeah. So I think the first part is that there are always going to be haters, and so
Yeah.
if you want to get in the online space, like, that's what you have to deal with. You have to deal
Yeah.
with people that are not doing the work that you're doing, people who are not putting in the long hours to
Yeah.
create this thing, and to help people. You have to just kind of turn it off. And I have to tell myself this all the time, to just, like, don't comment, just leave it there. Or if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. Just, like, leave it there. In some cases, you can comment knowing that it's not the person that you're actually telling that's going to be listening.
So it's like, I might be like inadvertently like roasting some first year music student,
Yeah.
type of thing.
So anyway, so that's kind of the first part, and then I feel the second part is your original question, which was when can you start to say, oh,
Yeah.
I have something of value, I can have an online course. I feel like for me, and it may be a different journey for a lot of people, I feel like when you start finding yourself not using the method books, and you go all around to all the different method books, and you're just uh, none of them are really capturing your method, if that makes sense.
Right.
If you have a method that's unique, that doesn't seem to be captured in what exists out there, then you might start considering, well, if this is helping my students, if this is helping my students get to a place where they weren't before, and I would like to get this to more people, and I can't just do it by private lessons. Like, there's no way that I could.
It's not
Yeah,
scalable.
it's
Yeah.
not scalable. A combination of those things are maybe factors that could make you consider, okay, I'm gonna start creating my own online course. The other thing is that if you are saying, well, my method is exactly the same as other methods, well, there's also the fact that it's you teaching it. So
Right.
you are unique, and there's going to be something about the way you teach it. However, in the process of creating your online course, you're going to have to figure out a way to communicate how it's different, how you're different. Otherwise, you probably won't get that many sales. If it sounds like, if it's just the exact same as every other thing, like anyone can create a course on, uh, theory. Like, if you're just like,
Yeah.
I made a theory course, please buy it. Like, it's a commodity, and
Yeah.
so it's going to people are going to view it on the same level as anything else. They're not going to be willing to pay any good money, but because I started to realize that there was a big gap in the industry, where a lot of the books on jazz piano actually start you like pretty far into the journey. They
Right.
start you like assuming that you already know everything um, about functional harmony. They assume that you know everything about basic seventh chords. Um, and I feel like for the harmony aspect, that's a big thing. And then
Yeah.
beyond that, I find that they spend way too long on harmony, 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 and which I'm like super harmony nerd. So it's not like I'm bagging on harmony or anything like that. It's just that um, that I found that all of the existing books focused so much on harmony that they didn't get someone to a specific place. And so for me and my students, I find that the turning point for most beginning jazz pianists is that first jam session that they go to.
Right.
So if you can get to a jam session, if you can get the skills, all the necessary skills and none of the unnecessary skills, to go from where you are not knowing anything about jazz piano to actually sitting down and playing with a band, after you get that like initial rush of like, wow, I have these skills, I can sit with the band, then I find that it's a snowball effect after that.
Yeah.
But
If you have a bit of a success, it's kind of gets people excited and interested.
right, and so like that's the unique proposition of my course, is that in 8 weeks you're going to go from being a pianist. It's not like we're taking anyone off the street. You're a pianist, and we're going to give you the skills to, one, comp in a band, two, play melodies, and then three, solo, and in a very, very simple way. So those three skills are what you need to play in a band. And so we give you those skills and nothing else.
Yeah.
We give you a beeline from where you are to playing in a jazz band. And so I feel like the question of like, well, how can I, you know, just so I can stop talking about my course if you don't want to be hearing that, if the listeners don't want to be hearing that. The point is that when you feel like you have a clear thing to offer, like you were saying at the beginning, what
Value prop.
yeah, what's the value proposition? What problems are we solving? and how are we going to do that? If that is unique, then everything else will follow.
Yeah, I think of two interesting things from what you just said. So I guess the first thing is like, I think it's one thing to be like, I'm going to develop the skills that I need to be a good teacher. But
Mm,
being able to identify, like you were able to identify the things that, weren't in the method books, right? But you had to go through the method books and have
yeah.
the experience to know like, all right, this is what I think is missing from, the repertoire of music education,
Yep.
right? The problem that I'm solving, the gap in the market that I'm
Yep.
going to fill, right? I feel like sure you might be able to luck into that, but you probably need like a fair amount of experience to be able to point that out, right?
Yeah.
To find that thing.
Yeah. I've been teaching jazz. Let's see. I'm 30, so I've been teaching jazz piano for probably 13 years, 12,
Yeah.
13 years, and some of it's been in the context of like I'm the high school jazz band pianist and the junior high jazz band pianist is asking me to teach them. Like
Yeah.
that was the first exposure to that, and I don't even remember what I taught then. And then um, there was kind of teaching when I was a music major. I honestly didn't teach jazz piano consistently. I was doing a lot of
Yeah.
more beginning students where I'm teaching mostly classical piano. And then I actually taught jazz piano lessons and classes at the University of North Texas. So I taught secondary lessons. So anyone who wanted to take lessons, but they weren't a jazz piano major. And then I
Right.
also taught the freshman course
Yeah.
for freshman jazz piano majors. So um, so it was mostly as I was teaching these secondary students, so people they had already gone through 2 semesters of jazz piano courses. Uh, like at UNT, if you're a jazz major, you have to take 2 semesters of jazz piano courses, and then beyond that, they had already taken presumably 4 semesters of class piano
Right.
also, which is
So they
fairly
were they
standard.
were coming in with some experience, some piano
You
knowledge.
would think, yes, you would think that after going through 6 semesters of piano, that you would be able to play in a band some very simple voicings. But what I found with working with these students is that there were these massive gaps in their playing,
Yeah.
and because of these gaps, meaning because they had basically had a fire hose shoved up their mouth of all these types of voicings, types of chords,
Yeah.
they weren't able just to comp in a simple way
Well,
with a band.
I also think that that's where some of that general knowledge could be useful because I remember like I'm not a great pianist. Like I'm basically like maybe a good enough pianist to like accompany rehearsals. Like that's
I mean,
debatable, let's put
that's
it that way.
that's if you're not a piano major, that's better than 95%
Oh,
of
yeah.
non
Um,
pianists.
and that's a very big, debatable, let's
Right.
put it that
That's
way.
fine. Yeah.
But I remember while I was at university, I took a keyboard harmony class. Right,
Hmm.
part of oral training at the way that it was, so like you basically had keyboard harmony, sight singing, and dictation, kind of all crammed into the one course, and you did like one for like an hour a week, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I remember I actually did really well in the keyboard harmony class,
Hmm.
and the reason was that I was like a very mediocre piano player compared to like some of the other piano players.
Hmm.
Like there are people who are studying piano in this course as well, but like what they would do in that course was like we had to like realize figured basses at the piano type of thing. And like harmonize melodies at the piano that like if you didn't know theory, which most people were terrible at theory
Right.
in like first and second year, that like even if you were a great pianist who could just like show up and sight read the notes, if you didn't have those theory skills, like you were just it wasn't gonna happen for you,
Right.
right? So it's like I had a background in theory that was like far ahead of my background in piano, and I was able to transfer that, and I could see that being something that is relevant for what you're talking about.
Yeah, and I feel like this is an issue in I wish that I knew a way to solve it. I can't say that I have a solution for it, but there in music schools you have all of these different classes that focus on these different aspects of music,
Hmm.
but really it's not any one of these things that's going to make a huge difference. It's usually the combination of all these things.
Right, being able to transfer one thing to boost you up in the other.
Exactly. And so um, and this is probably a topic for another day, but that issue being that there are all these prerequisites, like cross curricular prerequisites. Like if you want to
Yeah.
be successful in this keyboard harmony class, you have to know harmony, and you know, which that one's pretty self explanatory. But there are
Yeah.
a lot of other areas where if you're behind in one class and you get maybe you scrape by, the teacher's nice and they give you a B when you really just you scrape,
Didn't deserve
yeah,
it.
you scraped by every test, and and the thing that matters is not the grade. The thing that matters is you retaining that knowledge, because it
Right.
always builds on itself. So if you get to the next thing and you find you don't know all of your major and minor triads as well as you thought you did, everything else that you do after that point is going to be harder.
Yeah.
And so,
And I could see that being something that just like snowballs for like an entire career.
yeah,
Like,
and so when people are coming to me and they're wanting to get to a point where they, for example, I have vocalists that study with me that want to self accompany on their gigs. They want to be
right.
able to do solo gigs, or they just want to be able to play through a tune and practice at home, even though they've taken presumably at least 6 semesters of piano, because they were scraping by. And I scraping by is probably not the right analogy. It's
You're like
more
passing.
like it's more like they were being dragged behind a carriage, like a horse-drawn carriage, um, because they weren't ready for, because they didn't like master the things in their piano 1 class. They got to the
Yeah.
piano 2 class, still same thing. They were, because they were going through all these classes and they never truly digested all the material. They never got it in their hands and in their mind. Because of that, they come to me and they still don't have all of those skills that they had, that they were supposed to learn in piano 1, 2, and 3. And so, um, so getting back to, you know, the problem that I'm trying to solve is really this. It's you took all of these classes, specifically for piano majors, or even piano majors who maybe have taken a jazz piano class at some point that was confusing and overwhelming to them, or maybe jazz majors who understand the theory but have never been able to get it into their hands.
Right.
Um, Having a place where they can solidify their skills, not just not just uh, learn it well enough to get through a test, like in the course. And one of the things that makes it unique is I'm giving you actual, like, step by step methods, not only to how to learn things in a way that is going to force you to solidify those skills, but also uh, it's going to make it so that you can use it going forward. So that's kind of the one of the big focuses of my course, is giving you those fundamentals that you need if you want to play jazz piano.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Michael, this has been a great discussion.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up here, what thought, idea, piece of advice? I'm giving you the last word. What do you
Yeah.
want to end off with?
Yeah, I mean, we went through a lot of things, so let me just quickly like wrap up. So we talked about a lot about like being a specialist or a generalist. I think the the main thing I would say is be intentional about your journey. Um, don't let other people or voices tell you what you have to do, or um, don't let people pigeonhole you into one area. But also, if you, but also don't be afraid to focus. So be willing to open up new branches, to open up new opportunities, but also be willing to prune them if you need to, so that you can have more
Yeah.
focus in your journey and ultimately accomplish your ultimate dreams as a musician.
Michael, thank you so much for coming on regarding music. It's been a pleasure to chat with you.
Thank you.